Looking back, I can now trace the path of my life to a series of seemingly insignificant moments. I was raised in a small town, where everyone knew everyone else, and your reputation was everything. My father owned a metalworks company, and my mother was a teacher at the local high school. Together, they taught me the importance of hard work and perseverance. I carried those lessons with me, even when life took an unexpected turn. After high school, I left my small town, eager to find my place in the world. College wasn't in the cards for me, so I joined a local construction team. I liked the rhythm of the work, how sweat and effort could turn into something real. But deep down, what I truly wanted was stability, a family of my own. I always envisioned a life filled with love, laughter, and a home where I could build something meaningful more than just walls and roofs. Anna came into my life during a time when I was desperately searching for something more. She was bold, radiant, and had a sharp wit that could cut through the darkest days. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, and from the moment she smiled at me, I was hooked. We married quickly, perhaps too quickly, but I believed in us. I thought we could weather any storm together. Looking back, I see now how naive I was. My name is Jacob Dawson, and for years, one single date haunted me: March 10, 2014. That day would change everything. I arrived home earlier than expected from a work trip, only to walk straight into a nightmare. My wife of 6 years, Anna, was in our bed with Mark Evans, a man I barely tolerated even on my best days. While discovering her affair was excruciating, it wasn't entirely unexpected. Anna had seemed unhappy for a while, unhappy with me, and unhappy with our life. The economic downturn had only made things worse. We had bought our house right before the recession, and now we were drowning in mortgage debt. Anna had been wanting out, and I convinced myself it was just a rough patch. But the worst part was that she had been the one to push for the house in the first place. Now, she was complaining about the mortgage. Since Christmas, when she had been upset over the gifts I had given her, Anna had become impossible to please. The only bright spot in my day was seeing our daughter, Ella. She always greeted me with a smile that lit up the room. It was the only warmth I felt compared to the coldness I received from Anna. I'm not sure why I married Anna. It was a mistake from the beginning. We were both coming off failed relationships, and we just married because that's what everyone else did. Looking back, I realized none of those reasons had any real substance. The marriage was rocky at first, but I grew to love her. When Ella was born, I thought our bond had only grown stronger. But now, I wonder if Anna was simply a brilliant actress or a master manipulator. Until last year, I thought our life was solid, strong relationship, good family. But I was wrong. I had told Anna I would be home on Thursday, but I arrived on Wednesday. She worked mornings, and Ella was at school, so I decided to take a chance. I noticed an unfamiliar car parked outside, and when I walked in, I heard sounds from the bedroom. It wasn't subtle. I didn't need to sneak around. I stood there long enough to snap a few pictures on my phone. I wasn't angry at first, just profoundly sad. Our marriage was over, and I knew there was no coming back from this betrayal. My life was about to unravel. The financial strain was bad, but it would only get worse. I'd lose precious time with Ella, and I'd never share any closeness with Anna again. But when Anna saw me, instead of offering an apology, she screamed, "What the hell are you doing home early, Jacob?" I grabbed her by the hair and yelled, "You're an idiot. You're in my bed with him, and you're asking why I'm home early." I didn't even notice Trent behind me until it was too late. He called emergency. When the police arrived, we were still shouting. Trent, wrapped in a sheet, met them at the door, and they rushed into the bedroom. I was arrested for pulling Haley's hair, though I hadn't hurt her. It took me a few days to come up with bail, and by then, Haley had taken Tina and emptied our accounts. I came home to an empty house. The next week, when I went to work, a bailiff was waiting for me. Haley had filed for divorce, accusing me of misuse. I countered with infidelity, but it didn't matter. The court sided with her, giving her custody of Tina, and ordering me to pay alimony and child support. After selling the house, my credit was ruined, but I still had my job, though everything else felt shattered. If it weren't for Tina, I probably would have left town. At least I was cleared of the attack charges, but it didn't change anything. Most nights, I found myself at Johnny's Tavern, listening to drunks talk about how they'd never let their wives cheat. They'd laugh, and tell me I wasn't a real man for letting another guy steal my wife. And, after hearing that too many times, I started going to a different bar. One night, as I left Johnny's, I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was judging me. At work, my colleagues either ignored me or treated me like I was pathetic. I began to consider the revenge talk I'd heard from those drunks about how I should get back at the two of them for ruining my life. One Sunday, I had Tina for the day, and we decided to visit my parents. After dinner, Tina went to her room to watch TV, and my parents joined me at the kitchen table for coffee. I wasn't planning on opening up, but something about that moment made me. I told them I felt powerless and needed to do something to feel like a man again. My dad, who had been quietly sipping his coffee, was the first to speak. "Are you thinking about revenge, Charlie?" he asked. "I'm not sure, Dad. I just can't do nothing," I replied. He put down his cup and looked at me. "Revenge is tricky. It might feel good at first, but it usually leaves you emptier. You get your revenge, and then their friends come after you. It's a cycle." I respected my dad's wisdom, but in that moment, I wasn't in the mood to listen. I wasn't about to look weak. "Charlie, if you go after them, I'll be very disappointed. Let it go. Violence just makes things worse." A few weeks later, everything aligned. One night after leaving the diner, I saw Haley and Trent across the street. They were leaving a restaurant, sharing a kiss, then got into a Lexus. As it pulled away, Haley's head dropped into Trent's lap. I stormed to my old Chevy and pounded the steering wheel. Once I calmed down, I started the car and drove off, telling myself I was being smart about it, planning every detail. A few weeks later, I tracked Trent down and caught him alone at night. I struck his ribs with a baseball bat, making sure not to seriously harm him, but to cause him discomfort. I broke his leg and severed his arm before hearing someone shout from a house nearby, "Stop. I've called the cops." Panicked. I threw the bat, my jacket, and mask into a dumpster. When I picked up Tina next, Haley confronted me, asking if I attacked Trent. I just smirked, saying nothing, enjoying the uncertainty I'd left her in. Of course, the cops started questioning me, but I denied everything, claiming I had been home alone. The bat was never found, but a drunk from Johnny's Tavern testified, lying about me bragging about the attack. The cops pressed charges for aggravated assault and attempted homicide. I was stuck with a public defender, and although the DA's case relied on circumstantial evidence and false testimony, it was enough. At trial, I was acquitted of attempted homicide, but found guilty of aggravated assault. I got 5 years in prison, but there was some relief. Trent's injuries weren't as bad as they seemed. Then, on October 16th, I met my new cellmate, Ronald Iron Ron Young. I wasn't gay, but in prison, your options are limited. Ron and his Aryan gang wouldn't let me live peacefully unless I complied. It was simple: submit or die. 6 months later, my mom visited. She told me Haley had married Trent and moved to Texas. They wouldn't let my parents see or talk to Tina. My mom tried to reach Haley's mother, but she just laughed. "Cruelty runs in their family," she said. I told my mom I never cheated on Haley. "She's the one who did this. I'm working with a prison attorney. Maybe the judge will let me see Tina again." By the end of the visit, my mom started to soften. She promised to visit again, but we didn't discuss the darker parts of prison life. I won't go into all 5 years. I didn't change much. I didn't use my time to better myself. I spent my first year lifting weights, channeling my anger toward Ron, Haley and Trent. By the end, I was a solid 210 lbs, my 6 a frame hardened by rage. A year in, Ron got a new cellmate, Kevin Johansson. I was moved out and had to defend for myself. The first time 2 guys came after me, they ended up in the hospital, and I was sent to solitary for a month. Unfortunately, my first parole hearing was that same month, and it wasn't postponed. 2 years later, I stood before the parole board again. After about 20 minutes, I lost my temper when one panel member asked why I hadn't apologized for mistreating my ex-wife. All the bitterness I'd bottled up exploded. I was married to Haley for 6 years. I never touched her, but she had an affair in our bed. The only thing I did was attack him out of weakness, and that's why I'm here in prison. I had to fight for survival, for my dignity. The justice system let her accuse me of abuse, take everything, and keep me from seeing my daughter. How is that justice? Unsurprisingly, I served my full sentence for 5 years. I heard nothing from Tina. My efforts to regain contact with her went nowhere. I didn't learn much in prison, except how to scam people online. When I got out, I worked at a warehouse unloading trucks. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me busy. Meanwhile, I created an online identity for Amy Carson, a widow raising money for an animal shelter through her fake website Save Our Furry Friends. I collected donations and sold stolen credit card info. Within 2 months, I made $21,000, enough to move forward with my post-prison plans. I needed to feel alive again, so I decided to go all in. I'd been without a woman for over 6 years, and was desperate for the experience. Armed with a medical certificate and $700, I went to a bar. When I met Candy Suet, I was taken aback by her beauty. "Charlie," she said with a smile. A smile. "Why the pants?" I asked, noticing she wasn't wearing a skirt. "Because tonight, I'm spending it with a man who paid $600, plus tip," she replied, grinning. I wasn't bothered by the fact that Candy had a prosthetic leg, even if some clients had asked for discounts. I ordered a drink and sat beside her. Soon, I noticed a guy staring at me, but I kept calm. He offered to buy me a drink, but I politely declined, telling him I was waiting for someone. Candy put a hand on my shoulder, signaling me to stay composed. I stood up, handed the guy a $20, and said, "I appreciate the offer, but I'll take care of my companion's drink." I made sure he saw the scars on my hands from years in prison. After a tense moment, he took the $20 and walked off, saying, "Enjoy your evening." Candy smiled. "Thanks for handling that. Could have gotten ugly." I raised an eyebrow. "How do you stay so calm?" Candy grinned. "It's too soon to talk about me. Let's focus on having a good time tonight." The bartender gave me a free drink. "It's on the house," he said, nodding. "I appreciate how you handled that situation. Had a fight last week, cost me $400 to fix the damage." I raised my glass in thanks, and sipped it slowly, feeling the warmth spread. After finishing our drinks, Candy and I walked outside. "I've got a room next door," I said. "Want to grab something to eat before we head up?" "No, maybe later. Pizza, or Chinese," she replied casually. "It's all on you," I said, with a grin, leading her toward the hotel. In the elevator, I couldn't stop smiling. Candy looked up at me, curious. What she asked. I smiled wider. Jefferson smiled wider. You're just incredible. We entered the room, and it didn't take long for things to heat up. Afterward, we collapsed into bed, resting for a bit. "That was unexpected," I admitted, catching my breath. Candy glanced at me, with a playful smile. To what was? "I didn't think it would be that good, and I sure didn't expect you to enjoy it so much," I said, still a bit stunned. Candy chuckled. "Well, I am a professional," she said with a teasing laugh, but there was no judgment in her voice. I sighed. "I've never paid for this before. I always assumed someone who did this for a living would be, a little more distant, like they'd be faking it. But you weren't faking anything." "What?" "Thanks," she said softly, her tone warming. "You want to order now? You want the tango?" We settled on Chinese food, and while we waited, we both showered. As I stood there, I noticed Candy's prosthetic leg now up close and personal. It was just below the knee, made of metal. I couldn't help but stare, fascinated by it. "Does it bother you?" she asked, sensing my gaze. I shrugged, looking up at her. "No, not at all. Honestly, it's amazing. I didn't even notice when we were walking here. You didn't limp or anything." She smiled, a hint of pride in her voice. "I get that a lot. It's just a part of me now." Later we made love again, then lay in bed together. The next morning, after another shower, Candy caught me eyeing her prosthetic leg again. "It was a motorcycle accident," she said, her voice calm as though she'd answered this question 100 times. "Your leg?" I asked, still surprised. "Everyone asks," she replied, almost in a detached tone. "You were polite enough not to, but now you're curious." I nodded. "Matching song from Saimyi, Mayan Nash. How did it happen, so Mel?" She sighed. "I was with this guy Randy. He bought a new bike and wanted to show off. Thought he was some kind of expert. I was dumb enough to get on the back. He tried to impress me by speeding up, lost control, and we crashed. I lost my leg." "What happened to Randy?" I asked. "He didn't wear a helmet. Another stupid choice. He damaged his head on a lamppost. He was in a coma for a week before they turned off the machines. He didn't make it." Candy's voice softened, but there was still a coldness to it. "I guess I should feel sorry for him, but he's the reason I'm like this. He had no insurance, didn't cover my medical bills, and now I'm stuck paying for it all. So yeah, I'm a little bitter." I didn't know what to say. What to say? So I just nodded. "The worst part was when my parents found out what I was doing," she continued. "They disowned me. I became a hoe in their eyes." I looked at her, my tone growing more serious. "There are worse things than being paid for sex though." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Like what?" Like my ex-wife, I said, the bitterness in my voice impossible to hide. I then shared the story of Haley with Candy. By the time I finished, she was in agreement my ex was a piece of work, even worse than her. That made me laugh though. It was the first time I'd found any humor in the whole mess. Are you hungry? I asked. Let me buy you breakfast. That sounds great, she said, with a smile. But then I've got to run to class. She paused for a moment before adding, I'm not going to do this forever. Being promiscuous for a living, it's not my plan for the long run. I looked at her, hearing the finality in her words. You know, people talk about guys falling in love with women like you. With someone like you, I get it. But let's be realistic here. You're a career woman. Even if you weren't, what could I offer you? What could I offer any woman? The next day, I moved on to the second part of my plan. I met up with Juan Price at a diner downtown. Juan was an outside contact for a major black prison gang. After a brief negotiation, we agreed on a price $155,000, with a condition: when he cut the man's throat, 2 names would be whispered into his ear. Mine, and Johansson's. John wasn't the kind of guy to mess around, he'd said. He'd been accused of things, but never convicted, and I trusted him to keep his word. I heard about what went down inside, he said, his voice calm. I can't blame you for wanting revenge. It's not revenge, I corrected him. It's justice. Juan nodded, but there was an edge in his voice when he mentioned Ron Young, the man who had been the catalyst for all this. Johansson didn't deserve what happened to him. After a year of being Young's playmate, he ended up dead. Rumor has it Ron held his head too long, strangled him. Johansson deserved better. After Johansson died, Young was thrown in solitary for 2 months and charged for not reporting it, I added. But that's the gist of it. Whatever the reason, he's as good as dead. You don't have to worry about that, John said, his tone darkening. Our deal stays between us. I nodded. Understood, I replied, locking eyes with him. Juan nodded and left without saying another word. I hadn't lasted 5 years in prison by running my mouth. 4 days after the prison riot that claimed the lives of 4 inmates, word spread that Aryan Ron Iron Young had been fatally stabbed. This set off more violence, and the suspect in the homicide was eliminated in the chaos that followed. And the prison was shut down for 3 days as a result. Meanwhile, my little online venture with the Amy Carson website had run its course. I pulled the plug on it before law enforcement could catch wind and start digging into it. Honestly, the whole thing had become insignificant. The amount of money invested was too small for anyone to bother. I was now fully focused on tracking down Tina. Haley's Facebook account had vanished 2 years ago, with her last post showing their family in front of Disneyland. Tina had just turned 9, smiling happily with Haley and Trent. Then, there was nothing. I felt a pang of frustration. Out of curiosity, I typed Trent Miller into Google. To my surprise, I found out he was living in Chicago. There was no trace of Haley, but at least I had a lead. It cost me $1,000 money I'd earned through less than legal means to hire a private investigator. The investigator dug up some valuable info. Trent no longer lived with Haley, and he had a job in the city. He also had certain hangouts after work. It didn't take long for Trent to recognize me when I slid onto the bar stool next to him. My appearance had changed drastically since the last time he saw me back during my sentencing. With my muscular frame, broken nose and shaved head, I probably looked pretty intimidating. Trent studied me warily, then asked, "Are we going to have a problem?" I'd anticipated this moment before approaching him, already preparing my response. "No," I said, shaking my head. Hitting me with a baseball bat was a mistake. That mistake cost me 5 years of my life, the hell of prison, and the chance to watch my daughter grow up. I'm not wasting any more time on the past. I looked him dead in the eye. "I came to ask you one thing. Do you know where Tina is?" No. He studied me for a second before answering, his voice calm. "I'd tell you if I did. Haley left me for another man, and the 3 of them disappeared. I have no idea where they went." I could tell from his eyes something I'd learned to read in prison, that he was being truthful. Prison teaches you that eyes are the windows to the soul. Trent paused, his voice suddenly softer. "I need to say something, Charlie. I shouldn't have gotten involved with Haley when she was still married to you. It was wrong. I really loved her, and I thought she loved me. It hurt when she dumped me for that other guy. That's when I understood how you must have felt." He took a swig of his beer before continuing. "When we started talking, she fed me a pack of lies I didn't catch on to until later. She told me you misused her, that your marriage was a joke, and that it would end in divorce. I thought I was the knight in shining armor. When you beat the hell out of me, it just confirmed what she'd told me." Trent paused again, before speaking more seriously. I didn't agree with Haley cutting you and your family out of Tina's life. I thought it was a huge mistake, but she insisted I back off. Tina wasn't my kid, and I had no say in it. I loved her, but I was never her father. And Tina missed you, Charlie. Hearing him say that nearly broke me. My throat tightened, and my eyes welled up, but I fought to keep it together. I didn't want Trent to see how much his words affected me. As Trent turned to the bartender, asking for a pen and paper. After scribbling something down, he handed it to me. I don't know where they ended up, he said, his voice low. But this is the guy who took my place, Barry Stewart. He's a carpenter working for a real estate developer in Plano. Chase Holmes Stewart was working on homes just a block from our house. I don't know how he met Haley. But the first time I knew about him was the day she packed up his truck and left. I didn't even realize what was happening until a neighbor called to ask why Haley was loading stuff into a truck. I got home just as they were leaving. We argued, and then the cops showed up. He paused again, bitterness creeping into his voice. I didn't realize the cops weren't detaining them, and they drove off. Later I found a note in the kitchen. It just said goodbye, our accounts were drained. I spent thousands trying to find her, but nothing came of it. A year later, I sued her for infidelity and abandonment, sold the house, moved here. I could hear the grudge in Trent's voice. He still held anger, not just for Haley, but for me too. I just wanted to see my daughter, he added quietly. I thanked Trent for the information, bought him another drink, and left the bar, feeling uncertain about my next move. Trent had spent thousands searching for Haley, so why would I waste my limited resources doing the same thing? But there was one person who likely knew where Haley and Tina were: Haley's mother, Margaret Turner. The risk was there. If I got caught, I'd be back in prison, but I couldn't think of any other way. Margaret Turner was a creature of habit, a woman who didn't change. Every Sunday, she went to church at 9 a.m., and she always left a spare key hidden in the faux stone by the patio door. She probably thought her Rottweiler, Brutus, was all the security she needed. At 9:02 a.m., I climbed over the fence from the alley behind her house. The key was exactly where it should be. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, hearing Brutus growl in the distance, a sound that would have sent most people running. But not me. Brutus rounded the corner and spotted me. In a moment of recognition, he reared up on his hind legs and licked my face. 6 years had passed since he last saw me, but that didn't seem to matter. He remembered the man who had adopted him from the shelter, trained him to sit, stay and come, and who had given him treats every time I visited Margaret's house. While Brutus was busy reacquainting himself with my face, I casually walked over to the counter, grabbed a dog treat from the cookie jar that Margaret always kept there, and tossed it onto the floor. Brutus eagerly scrambled to snatch it up. I used the brief moment to look around. The kitchen hadn't changed at all since the day John Turner passed away 9 years ago. The same cluttered desk, the same old bills, and the same computer where Margaret paid her bills. I sat down at the desk and turned on the computer. A password prompt appeared. After a moment's thought, I typed in John 316, and the machine powered up. While it booted, I rifled through a few drawers and found some letters. One of them confirmed Haley's new address in El Paso. I slipped a flash drive into the USB port, copied over Margaret's photo folder, her video files, and emails. I grabbed everything I needed, powered down the computer, patted Brutus on the head, and quietly left the house, making sure to lock the door and replace the key. That Sunday, I spent the day watching old videos and photos of Tina. She had grown so much, and it hit me hard how beautiful she had become. I felt like such a fool for missing all those years. From the letters and emails, I learned that Haley and Tina were living under the name Turner now, though they weren't married to Barry Stewart. Tina was in 5th grade. By Monday, I handed all the information I'd gathered, along with a $500 retainer, to a private investigator in El Paso. He confirmed that the address and details were current. We sat at the same kitchen table, where I'd eaten countless meals as a kid. The familiarity of it all hit me hard. Margaret Turner wasn't the only one who thrived on routine. Mom, Dad, I owe you both an apology, I began, my voice thick with regret. I've let you down. I should have listened to you. I should have known better than to let a bunch of losers talk me into seeking revenge. Mom walked over and hugged me tightly, while Dad gave my shoulder a firm squeeze. I found out where Haley and Tina are, I continued, and I need your help to get back in touch with her. I've got enough to make a trip to El Paso and hire a lawyer. I need your support to at least get visitation rights. Will you help me? Dad answered first, his voice heavy with caution. What exactly are you planning to do? This isn't going to turn violent again, is it? The question stung, but I understood. My past actions had made him wary. No, I reassured him. I'm consulting a lawyer first. I've been doing things right this time, and I'm not repeating my past mistakes. He didn't say much after that. But when I left the house later that afternoon, there was a subtle shift. I could feel the sense of forgiveness from my parents. I thought back to Trent's words, I never wanted to keep you away from Tina. I thought of my daughter, and what she might be going through without me. That night, I finally allowed myself to hope again. We answered the judge's questions, and then Miss Harper made it clear that at this stage, we were only seeking a preliminary meeting with Tina to reestablish contact. She suggested having a court-appointed social worker accompany us. Miss Harper also emphasized that due to Haley's previous actions in preventing the signs from seeing Tina, and later doing the same with Trent, we requested that Haley not be notified of the meeting, as she would likely try to delay it and manipulate Tina further. I was stunned when the judge granted our request and scheduled a meeting for the next day. We were to pick up Tina from school with the court order in hand, accompanied by Miss Harper and a social worker. We had 3 hours to speak with Tina at a local cafe, and then return her home. As I stepped out of the courthouse into the bright Texas sun, I felt lighter than I had in years. It took all my willpower not to hug Miss Harper on the spot. She assured me that she was already working on the follow-up paperwork to establish visitation rights for me and my parents. We'll meet tomorrow at 1:45, she said. The social worker will go with you to the school. Once you pick up Tina, I'll step back, and the social worker will stay with you until you return Tina to her home. Don't mess this up. Stay calm, stay sober, and no matter what happens, especially if Tina's mom causes a scene, stay composed. Expect her to make a scene, especially in front of the social worker that could actually help our case. Treat the social worker like a friend, she might become one. When we go back to court, the judge has given us an invaluable opportunity, don't waste it. With that, she left us. I hugged Mom and Dad, thanking them for all their support. The next 22 hours seemed to stretch on endlessly. We stayed close to the hotel, grabbing a quick meal at a diner across the street. A part of me feared something would go wrong. What if Tina wasn't at school when we arrived? My parents tried to reassure me, but I could see the same concern in their eyes. The next afternoon, we arrived at Miss Harper's office at 1 p.m. 35 minutes later, a short, stout woman, Miss Marie Hernandez, introduced herself. She explained her role as a social worker and how she would observe the situation without being intrusive. She had clearly read the case files, as she was particularly kind and understanding toward my mother, almost like a fellow grandmother. Miss Hernandez gave helpful advice on how to approach Tina, especially after such a long and traumatic separation. I was especially grateful for her guidance, as I was anxious about how Tina would react to me. We arrived at Tina's school 30 minutes before dismissal. The principal and vice principal reviewed the court order, consulted with the district office, and spoke with their legal department before agreeing to release Tina into our custody. 10 minutes before the bell rang, Tina was brought to the vice principal's office. The first person she saw was my mother, and Tina's face lit up with recognition. She rushed into my mom's arms, and Mom dropped to one knee, hugging her tightly and crying openly. When Tina saw my father approaching, she cried out, "Daddy!" As a child, she had mispronounced Grandpa, and the name stuck. Daddy scooped Tina up into his arms, kissing her on the nose, and Tina turned her gaze toward me. Her hesitation showed just how much I had changed since the last time we saw each other. It was exactly as Miss Hernandez had advised, let Tina reconnect with her grandparents first, as they still looked the same and shared a unique bond with her. I knelt down, arms wide, silently praying that Tina would accept my hug. To my relief, she did, throwing herself into my arms. Our reunion was abruptly interrupted when the vice principal walked in with Haley, who had been waiting in the school parking lot to pick up Tina. Haley looked around the room, furious. "What the hell is going on?" she shouted. "What are you doing here?" "Leave Tina alone." Miss Harper stepped forward, handing Haley a copy of the court order. "Miss Turner, this court order grants Tina's father and grandparents the right to visit with her today for 3 hours. They will be accompanied by Mrs. Hernandez to ensure Tina's safety, and that they return her to you within that time." Haley barely glanced at the papers before tossing them aside. "I don't care what these papers say. You can't just show up and take my daughter. Those people have no business here. She's my daughter." Haley lunged toward Tina, but Tina instinctively hid behind my mom. Mrs. Hernandez immediately stepped in front of Haley, recognizing the shift in the situation. "Miss Turner," Mrs. Hernandez said firmly, "do you want me to call the police? If you keep this up, I guarantee you'll be arrested and held Until you calmed down and stopped threatening people, the tension in the room was thick, but at least it felt like the first real step toward getting Tina back. At that moment, the assistant principal stepped in, trying her best to calm Haley down. She ushered Haley into her office, giving us a chance to slip away with Tina and Mrs. Hernandez. The four of us headed to a small cafe a few blocks from the school. While Mrs. Hernandez sat at a nearby table keeping an eye on things, earlier she had given us some advice on how to approach Tina after such a long separation. We followed her suggestions, and I believe it made all the difference. Tina didn't seem scared, but my heart shattered when she tearfully asked, "Daddy, why didn't you ever call me, send me letters? Why didn't I ever get birthday cards?" Thankfully, I had anticipated this question. I reached into my mom's purse and pulled out a large manila envelope. "Tina, I thought about you every single day we were apart. I sent you cards, postcards and letters. They all came back to me, though your mom sent them back. She didn't want me or your grandparents in your life." I showed her the envelopes, each stamped "Return to Sender" with Haley's handwriting on them. Twice I hired lawyers to try and get her to let me talk to you. "Why did she do that, Daddy?" Tina asked again, confused. I wanted to say, "Because your mother is cruel," but I held my tongue. I took her hand gently and said, "One day, you'll have to ask your mom about it, but not today. Today let's just talk, okay? You, me and your grandparents. We all love you and want to know what's been going on in your life. How's school? Do you play any sports? What are your friends' names?" The 3 hours passed in a blur. We drove to Haley's house, making sure to respect the time limit. When we arrived, Haley was waiting on the porch, cigarette in hand, clearly angry. I pulled up to the curb, and before I could even park, Tina piped up from the back seat. "I want to show you my room." Looking at Haley standing there, I hesitated. "I don't think today's a good day for that, Tina. Your mom doesn't seem too happy to have us here, but it's my house, and I should be able to show you my room," Tina protested, clearly offended. My mom, seeing the situation, gently suggested, "How about you show me your room today? Next time, we can all see it." Tina reluctantly agreed. "When nasa nwune, you and netball, almin uikin, kosan lendafin." Mrs. Hernandez, who had been quietly observing, said she needed to stay with them. So Mom, Mrs. Hernandez, and Tina got out of the car and walked toward the porch. Dad and I stayed behind, unable to hear the conversation clearly, but it was obvious it wasn't a friendly one. Despite Haley's fiery demeanor, Mrs. Hernandez was even more imposing. A few minutes later, Mom, Mrs. Hernandez, and Tina returned to the car. Haley remained on the porch, glaring at us. We stood there for about 10 minutes when, out of nowhere, 2 patrol cars pulled up, one in front and one behind us. My heart sank for a brief moment. I feared the worst. Had the hit and run with Ronald Young been discovered? Was someone finally catching up to me for the fake internet scam? Just as I was about to panic, 4 officers stepped out of the cars. Barry Stewart pulled into the driveway and hurried up to the porch. Mrs. Hernandez was the first to meet the officers at the front door. Dad and I watched as the police cuffed Haley and Barry. My mind was spinning. What is going on here? "Stay in the car, Charlie," Dad ordered, his voice firm. I wanted to jump out and run toward the scene, but he stopped me. "Let me handle this," he said, not giving me a choice. Before Dad could even open the door, Mom rushed out of the house and climbed into the back seat of the car. I was dying to ask her what had happened, but I could see the confusion on her face too. "I don't know exactly," she said, shaking her head. Mrs. Hernandez was looking around Tina's room when I paused when I was about to say something but hesitated. I had been through so much, and seeing Tina connect with someone again, especially after everything we had been through, was more than just a small victory. "I need to be honest though, Casey," I said, collecting my thoughts. "I haven't seen Tina connect with someone this quickly in a long time." It was true. And Tina had a way of making people feel comfortable, and even though she had been through so much, her ability to still trust others and form friendships was something I admired. Casey looked at me with understanding, nodding as she processed my words. "She's a special girl," she said quietly. "I can see that." I smiled, grateful for her kind words. "Yeah, she is. I just want to make sure she grows up with people who care about her, and if you're going to be part of her life, I want to make sure it's a positive one." Casey nodded again, a bit more seriously this time. "I understand, Charlie, I really do." As Tina came back, laughing and chatting with her new friends, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. Maybe things were starting to settle into place, and maybe, just maybe, we could have a normal life now. Tina ran up to me, her face glowing with excitement. "Dad, can we do this again? I had so much fun." She threw her arms around me, and I hugged her tightly, feeling a sense of gratitude that words could never fully express. "We will, kiddo," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We will." That was the moment I realized we were moving forward, together. Despite all the obstacles and heartbreak, we were building something new, something stronger. And with people like Casey in our lives, I could see a future filled with hope for both Tina and me. I looked at Casey one last time, her warm smile reassuring me that we were on the right track. "Thank you for being here today," I said to her. "It meant a lot." Anytime, she replied with a wink. As Tina and I left the restaurant, walking toward the car, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I was focused on the future, and the future, it seemed, was looking brighter than ever.